welcome to our Zoom podcast, Unashamed. And this week on our show, we have Change4Trenton, an organization in Trenton, Michigan that is doing a lot to reform and work with our public school system in our city. And so for the conversation today, you have me, Brandon, the host. You have Alyssa Offman, who is our office administrator and pastoral assistant and seminary student at Luther Seminary. You have Rachel and Kevin Cartwright, the parents of 3 wonderful children in the Trenton school system. You have Brianne Dolce, who is coming with us from us over in the Netherlands, and we're glad to have her here. And then we have Hannah Mitsusada Boylan, who is a Trenton resident, and yeah, we're just excited to have everyone here. So how's your holidays been? Everything was pretty good? Pretty chill?
Yeah, pretty quiet, but nice.
Nothing super crazy?
Yes. Nothing super crazy. Socially distanced, open presents outside, wild masked, you know, the whole shebang.
A lot of time on Zoom.
Yep.
On Zoom? Yeah, this is where we are. Everybody has to figure out how they're going to do what, you know. So does anybody have any cool family traditions that they did in the holidays, or they usually do but they didn't get to do?
Got woke up way too early by our 3 kids on Christmas morning.
You would think they would outgrow that, but that has not happened yet.
We had a rule at our house that my sister and I, we could not wake up our parents until 8 o'clock. That was the rule. So we would be sitting like on the stairs, like staring at the presents, waiting for 8 o'clock to hit. And then the second it turned 8, we're like running up the stairs, jumping on our parents and waking them up.
Well, you would assume almost 18-year-old and 16-year-old and 14-year-old, they would be sleeping until noon. And I was expecting that this year, but 7 o'clock they were banging on our door.
Amazing.
So Alyssa, her son got to do something really cool this year on Zoom with Santa. Alyssa, tell him what happened.
Well, Brandon, so we have Open Book. Are you familiar with Open Book Theater over on West Road in Trenton? They did Zooms with Santa. So Brandon bought my son Theo, who is 5, a Zoom with Santa. So it was like a one-on-one experience where like the elf, like he talked to the elf first, and then they like took him into the Zoom room with Santa, and Mrs. Claus was there. And it was really the most awesome thing. Cause like, when you take them to the mall, like Santa doesn't know who you are, but like I got to send them a note and say like, this is Theo, his little brother's named Milo, our pets are named these are the things that Santa makes in his workshop. These are the things he doesn't make in his workshop. And so it was the most amazing experience for him, because he's like, Santa knows our dog's name. And like, it was he loved it. And they recorded it, and then they send you the recordings. So like you get to save that and watch that when they're, rotten teenagers. You can go back and look at the wonder and amazement that they used to have. So it was pretty cool. I would do it again, even in non-pandemic life. I would do that.
It was the coolest thing ever. Shout out to Open Book Theater. So I think they'll do it next year. So if anybody has any young kids that they want to have that experience, Open Book, that's awesome. Yeah. So, all right. How about our guests? How about you just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and what your experience with what your experience with Trenton is, if you're a student, a former student, or something like that. Rachel and Kevin.
Okay. I'll go ahead and speak first. Parents of 3 Trenton students, did not grow up here, grew up close here to in Flat Rock, and actually grew up with Doug Minter, who was the superintendent of the school district. And he and I went to school together my whole life. When we moved to Trenton, we moved here because we wanted to be close to our family. We wanted to be in a community that offered a lot of things for the residents, that was convenient, that had good school district, and would allow our kids to thrive as they grew up. We had a 1-year-old when we moved here, so we were young, just starting. Growing up in Flat Rock, had a lot of friends that went to school in Trenton. I grew up in church just down the street here in Trenton.
Okay.
And I had some close friends here, and I always kind of looked up to Trenton, and was excited to when we moved here to move the family here and be close to folks that we knew, that we loved, and be part of the community.
Wow. Okay. That's powerful. Thank you for sharing. Rachel, anything you want to share?
Well, when we were younger, you know, now that we've lived here for nearly 20 years and you look back over your life and your decisions that you've made, I can't say that I'm not just a little bit sad about raising our kids here. I don't want to sound in a bad way. They had a really good academic upbringing. My daughter is accepted to 6 different universities that she applied to in Michigan with no problem. Our kids have been in band, and they've been in swim, and they've been in track, and the extracurricular activities and the electives, you know, they've all been wonderful. And so I feel like, you know, academically, they're prepared to kind of go out into the world or to their next stage. But the one thing that I kind of regret is just in Trenton, which I don't know that we knew when we moved here, was just the cycles of sameness. Everything is kind of the same. And we began to notice that, you know, as our kids went through the school system, that there wasn't any other voices than white voices, which is important for us, you know, to have in our lives. So when I got to talking with my kids, they've never had one Black teacher. Of all 3 of them, when I got to talking with them, they could come up with one teacher that might have been a person of color, you know, in their whole experience. So I guess the underlying assumption that my kids got an excellent education here in Trenton without the input of other voices, of, you know, non-white voices, I think is maybe a faulty assumption that we've had, and that my kids are going to be going out into a diverse world, which they haven't actually experienced yet. So in some ways, it's put them at a disadvantage to having the kind of conversations they need to have, the dialogue they need to have, even the language that they need to be able to have these kind of conversations. Right. And I think it's also kind of told them that, you know, when you grow up in a community where everybody's the same, that we're not really missing out on a different perspective, that there's not really another narrative that matters out there. It's our narrative that matters. And so they, I just don't think they're going to be as prepared as I would like them to be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense.
And that's on us. That's on us for, I mean, obviously we could have moved to a different community, and we had to weigh that once we really became clear. Or
you can stay and work within the community that you have, like this conversation is doing to try to bring to light some of those things. But I don't think that, you know, we're going to be graduating children from this community that are going to have a good understanding of the complex racial and social issues that are out there in the world. They have got a very narrow and a very lopsided view because of so much sameness. I mean, a lot of the teachers and principals and administrators that my children have, they grew up here. So they've not even left this community. So you can only share what you know. And if your experiences are small or limited or the same, we need other voices out there to add to the conversation so that our kids have a larger understanding of the world.
Thank you. And that's something I've noticed myself, is that Trenton will hire a lot of people who went to Trenton High School or grew up in the Trenton Public School system, you know, and that's not saying that's bad or good. It's just that's a thing, and there are consequences that come with doing that, right? Hence not having a diverse staff. Wow, I really appreciate you sharing your perspective on that. And Hannah and Brianne, you all grew up in Trent, right? You went to the Trenton Public School System, so you can probably relate to what they're saying a little bit in your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think just that was a really incredible way to start in some ways, because I think Kevin and Rachel summed up so much of the conversations that Change for Trenton has had amongst ourselves and with more people in the community. And there's something that Rachel said, cycles of sameness, that I think really stuck with me, and I think is really representative of a lot of the problems that we've tried to underline and highlight as things that can be strengths, but are not usually used as strengths, or used as just ways of creating the same community generation after generation without a lot of critical thought about what that does. Yeah, I don't know if Hannah wants to add anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a graduate of Trent High School. I grew up here my whole life, and I am one of the very few people, kids that were a kid of color. I was one of the very few, and looking back now, I didn't have a necessarily bad experience in Trenton. Like, growing up, I actually, my senior year, won most school spirit as a personality, which now I'm like, is that a great thing to have? But whatever, it's fine. But like, if you know me now, and like having grown and learned and evolved outside of Trenton, and luckily having the parents that I do have, I have really come to really accept and realize that I have faced a lot of like racism and discrimination, even though at the time that's not what I thought it was. I thought it was just people being mean and being like a bully, because like that's what all they taught us, was that everything was encompassed into just being mean and being a bully. And they didn't break that down even more and break down the systemic issues that come along with racism and sexism and all the other social issues that come along. And it's just, yeah, like I'm very, very, very extremely lucky that I have the parents that I have, and they have friends from all over the world, of all different cultures and ethnicities and sexual orientation. So I've never been, so outside of Trenton, I have experienced that. So going out into the real world, that didn't terrify me, and I knew how to navigate those people or those situations. But I know a lot of the people I went to high school with, they would have had no idea. Like, the thought of having a transgender friend, that would have broken every belief, that they grew up with. Even though to me that's totally normal. I'm like, okay, that's you do you. Like, let's hang out, let's get coffee sometime. Like, it's not a big deal. So yeah, it's just, yeah, it's just Trenton definitely misses the mark on really giving kids the true opportunity to actually really achieve and excel outside of the small community.
Right. And in conversations I've had and heard from other people, that I think there might be a lot of Trenton graduates or Trenton students that feel the same way and have had these experiences, for sure. Alyssa, I didn't ask you this before then, but you went to what is it, Woodrow Wilson High School, or
I went to Theodore Roosevelt High School.
Well, yeah, one of the presidents. Can you share just a little bit about your experience in Wyandotte?
Sure.
I'm curious.
Very similar. The bells are going off for me too. I had also 0 teachers of color. And I always say I could count on one hand, like, how many Black students I went to school with. And I remember their names. Like, I remember the 3 Black students and their names, because that's all, everyone else was white. And very conservative. And and then afterward, I went to Wayne State for college. So it was like a culture shock because it was the opposite,
Go
the
Warriors.
complete opposite. There, you know, there were very few, I mean, not very few, but white kids, but, you know, there were Black students, there were a lot of Muslim students, just from, you know, many, many, many different cultures, shade of person. So it really opened my eyes, but I also came with a lot of the baggage that one ascertains growing up in an all-white conservative area.
Mhm.
So I certainly put my foot in my mouth a lot. Like there, I could have benefited a lot from learning in high school things that I didn't learn until college and even beyond that.
Yeah,
So it's not, certainly not just a Trenton issue, but I think Wyandotte and Trenton maybe kind of fall into really similar categories of both being super white communities.
Flat Rock, Riverview, you could throw in there.
Yeah, and Wyandotte might even be more so. What I've heard is there are certain predatory housing laws that have really prohibited people moving in. So like they prohibit, made it harder for people to rent properties, which kind of keeps everyone the same because everyone, you know, it's harder for people of color to have access to loans and capital, and other avenues, financial avenues of, you know, getting property. Whereas like the white community, it's much easier. And plus you have families who are buying houses for their children and just like keeping that, like you said, those cycles of sameness, just like keeping that community the same.
Right, and that, yes, wow, and that system has been in place for what, 400 years, 200 years. So it's, well, it's interesting. I am learning a lot. I would not have thought about that for Wyandotte. Okay. So, and it sounds like all those experiences that you all had after high school and college when you were out in the world and traveling and all that sort of thing, it would have been very beneficial for you to have those experiences, or for your kids to have those experiences while they were in high school and middle school. Okay. So I'm not on Facebook right now, but I use Facebook Messenger. And like last November, I got a message from the great, esteemed, wonderful Wendy Pate, who's really awesome. And she said, hey, there's this group called Change4Trenton who's posting a forum and talking about fighting racism and all that stuff in the school system, and you should check it out. And I was like, what, you know? And so then I was able to get on the Zoom forum and learn about that, and just learn about what you all are doing. And you all have been probably, when did you all really get started with Change4Trenton? Was that kind of like at the beginning or the March of 2020, or what was that experience like, getting things off the ground?
Bree, you want to do this one?
Sure, that's fine. Yeah, how did we get off the ground? I'm trying to think of when exactly it was. I think it was sometime between, I mean, the last 10 months of my life are just one long blur of, I think seasons changed at some point, but I don't remember. I didn't go outside. So it was sometime between like April and June. It was shortly after the murder of George Floyd. And
Okay.
way that we got started was that I had seen on Facebook a friend of mine from college who went to Alpena for high school. He was from way up north in Michigan, had posted a petition that somebody in his school district had organized that said, we need to write a letter to the school district. We are a majority white district. We are causing harm. We need to address these issues. And I thought, wow, I know a place that really needs one of those. And it needs more than a petition.
Yeah.
So I sort of went, and I knew Amy and Hannah a bit. Amy was my sister's best friend in school, one of her closest friends. So I sort of knew the Mississauga Boylans a bit. And the three of us kind of got together and crafted the first draft of that letter and started circulating it, taking community feedback, welcoming any contributions that people wanted to make, saying, are we missing things that are happening? Are there other issues that we need to be bringing up? And within a couple of weeks, we had formed to this group of 8 people who ranged from, I think I was the oldest. I graduated from Trenton in 2009 to a 2020 graduate. So we sort of had this big spectrum of experience in the school district in the last decade. And we had this marathon 4-hour meeting where I think we all just on Zoom just unloaded experience and pain and disappointment, I think, really, when it comes down to it, onto one another, about things that we saw or things that, hurt us while we were members of the school district. And we were all young women as well. So there was a lot of that discussion about sexism and about misogyny that, we also had experienced. And we just became very close friends and very invested, I think, in sort of making sure that we stayed in contact constantly. And yeah, it was just kind of an incredible experience for me. I don't talk to most people that I went to high school with anymore. I left Trenton immediately and I haven't returned. And it was just kind of cool to meet a lot of other people who were like-minded. And I think that beyond the 8 of us, I mean, the Cartwrights have sort of been with us from the beginning as well. People who are also within that community who want to make that change, and just kind of creating this bubble that just keeps growing every couple of months. We sort of realize, we've got all of these people that follow us on Instagram, and they go to school board meetings now. I don't know, is that a correct characterization of how we started, Hannah? Am I missing anything?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Well, I'm curious, Bree, and you said you're in the Netherlands right now, and you said you left immediately. So I'm just curious, like, this isn't a community that you're in anymore. So just wondering if you could talk about why it's still important to you to be involved in this project.
That's a really great question. And I know that when people realize I'm really far away and that I haven't lived in Trenton since I was 18, that our biggest critics are like, why does she care? Why is she stirring the pot from thousands of miles away? I think that there are a lot of reasons. So, I mean, professionally and personally, I'm a historian. I started as a music historian. I now sort of do music history as well as more general history. And I think that there are moments for me that are really embarrassing. I mean, I do medieval history in Europe, but I still feel embarrassed when I don't know something about American history that I was just never taught. And so I think from an educational standpoint, I feel really strongly about our public schools, which I think are such important resources and are critical to the sort of health and well-being of every American, that they're actually doing a good job teaching these things, and that they're taking this as a responsibility that is a really big responsibility. But they're recognizing that change has to happen, right? So from a personal and professional standpoint, I care about all of that. But from an even more personal standpoint, I mean, my family has been in Trenton for a while. My dad graduated from Trenton High School. All of his siblings graduated from Trenton High School. My grandparents have owned a house in Trenton since they were 18 years old. This is a place that I am one of those sort of families that has never left the Trenton zone. And I have a lot of, friends of my parents who still have kids in the school district, friends that I went to high school with that I still keep in contact with on Facebook that have their first kids and they bought a house in Trenton, and who are kind of going, wait a second, this is actually really bad. What is going on? And I think that we have to care about those communities. So it might have been almost 12 years now since I left Trenton, but I still care about it as a place. It was still a really formative place for me. It offered me wonderful opportunities. I was also a band kid. I was drum major. I loved that community. That was a really important community for me. And I think if you don't care about the people that come after you, that says a lot about who you are as a person. You can be thousands of miles away, but you should still care about, what opportunities people are getting, but also the ones that they're really missing, if that makes any sense.
Perfect.
Well, one of our 3 children, at least at the moment, is dead set on leaving the community when they are old enough, getting out of the community, and is contemplating going to university in New Zealand, which I don't think you can get any further away. So
That's actually a really great school. My dad has a friend who's in New Zealand, and my sister was contemplating on doing like a study abroad program there. So we were trying to like set up, but yeah, that's a really good school. So I wouldn't, and also New Zealand's gorgeous. Like that's an amazing vacation opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a little bit.
If your kid ever wants to talk to someone about the sort of pros and cons of being that far away, I'm happy to. And if you ever need to sort of sit with a glass of wine with people that understand, my parents are in Riverview now, but they're still very close.
Yes.
They can sympathize.
Wow. That is, huh. I just keep learning so much. And I am very excited, and I was really impressed in all the feelings when I heard about like what you all had done with the letter and to the school board, and then going to the board meetings. So kind of like, what have you all? How did all that play out? So you got a letter. You wrote a letter. You had it all signed, and then you sent it to the school board, and then what?
So we sent the letter.
Uh-huh.
And we were going to read the letter at a school board meeting. And the initial meeting we were planning on reading it at was very overwhelmed with the discussion of COVID and the threat of COVID, and are we going to have kids return? Like, what is going on? So we're like, okay, we read the room, we see what's happening, we'll wait till next time. So they then really respected the fact that we decided to wait until the next meeting so that they could just really focus on the kids and the safety of the community. So they actually offered us an opportunity to be a part of the agenda in the following school board meetings, and so which allowed us to have a little bit more of an opportunity to dive deeper than just the letter and create a presentation, which we then presented to the school board as along with the letter. And then after that, immediately after, the school board had 3 members that formed a committee to then enact and work on enacting those action items that we had written up in our letter.
Yeah, it
And
was really a process from start to finish with the letter. And I think that one of the things that Hannah brings up, which I think might be kind of interesting just to talk about, is that we've had to really figure out timing and how to navigate when to respond to urgency, but also when to be really careful about how we move around the sort of institutions and entities that are at play. And that meeting, I mean, that was like a 3.5-4-hour school board meeting. I was 6 hours ahead. I don't think I went to bed until about 4 o'clock in the morning. There was just tension on Zoom and YouTube. And we're all sort of on this group chat, like, what do we do? On the one hand, we know racism is something you can't wait on, but there are really mad parents, and there's unions, and there are teachers, and just trying to, I think navigating both of these things at the same time has been difficult and challenging, but it's also taught us a lot about community work and community activism and creating those connections with people, because it paid off for us in the end. We had a lot more time, we had a bigger platform, and they were really respectful. And I think it also kind of created a bit of trust between members of the school board and us to say, we're not working against you.
Right.
And I think that was really important, but it was a stressful night for everyone involved, I think.
Well, and from what I understand, what I read is that there was a committee formed off the school board to look at the action items, right? Has any action taken place kind of like since the initial board meeting, or with the committee?
Not necessarily. So we've kind of figured out this as we've gone along, is that everything in the education system takes a long time.
Yeah.
So like simple things that we think that are like really easy that they could put in and start doing actually takes like a really long process. And like, for example, like in our letter, we talked about requiring or working with with teachers and requiring certain personal development. Well, it turns out to require personal development, there's a meeting with the union, with the teachers union, and then the teachers union then decides, like with a lawyer and like a whole bunch and like a couple other groups of people, like what ones are required, like how many they need, blah blah blah. Like like all these things have to be sorted out in like our like 4 or 5 different meetings. So the school board, the committee members that are on the school board, they learned that and are actually now going to be a part of the upcoming meeting that where they vote on personal development requirements and stuff like that. But yeah, we really learned that it just takes a long time, that nothing happens right away. And even the committee members, they're like, okay, week 1 we're gonna get this one done, and then the next week we're gonna get this one, and then this one, and then this one. But it takes a really long time. So and honestly, I think it's taken a little longer than a lot longer than what we anticipated, because we knew it wasn't going to happen right away. Some of these action items that we put in our letter, we knew were going to be like years on end for like things that to work on for a really long time. But some of them were like, well, why can't you do it now? Use just like a quick little signature and there you go. But but yeah, it's taking a long time.
Yeah. You don't, if you want to do something, you want to do it right. You just can't slap a Band-Aid on it, and the long journey towards justice, it's a marathon, not a sprint. That's a lot of cliches that I just put out there. Alyssa, do you want to jump in and help me out?
Oh yeah. So how do you sustain the stamina? So that's one thing that like the church is very similar. I was just having this conversation with someone else. Like it takes forever to do anything in the church. I'm like, anticipate 6 months longer than you think it should ever take. That's how long it's going to take, and maybe more. These massive organizations, you're right. It's just the cogs are just, they don't turn like they ought to. But and so I think it can be like you can be really excited about something, and then as it's taking longer, you can really lose steam. So how are you maintaining the stamina that it takes for change to happen?
I mean, I would say that like anyone, we're really human. There are some weeks where we have all of the energy and the drive in the world, and there are other weeks where we text each other and we're like, oh my gosh, I just like, I need a couple of days, like I'm not fully here, or, something happens for one of us with work, or, the holidays happen. So I think that we're still trying to figure out how we maintain the stamina. That's not something that we're consistent at yet. But I think that the last, almost 9 months or so have really taught us that slower is going to be better. That we can't, there were weeks in the beginning where we had 5 meetings between administration or a former teacher that wanted to talk to us. And, by the end of these meetings, it was exhausting, and we were really excited because they had given us so many ideas and we had all of this energy ready to go. But that's not sustainable when this is like community-based work you're trying to do on top of being humans with day jobs and families and lives, right? So I think that kind of the way that we're approaching this now is like kind of having a long-term list and then shorter-term lists of like, we need to catch up with this person again at some point. Where does that fall on like the priorities? How many things can we do in a week? Because our capacity is sort of lower right now than it was at the very beginning of the pandemic, where everybody was working from home, or in the summer when we had a little bit more time. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Hannah. It's an ongoing struggle for us, I think.
No, yeah, for sure. And the other thing I think is just like setting small goals, rather than like piling up like a bunch of big things, as Bree was saying, like before when we were having like a meeting a day or or like 2 meetings a day. But now it's toned down to just a couple meetings during the month, and just staying in open communication with the community members and the school board members. Like like the committee members that we've been speaking with. Yeah, just having smaller goals and working on those rather than, trying to, you know, be super engaging with our Instagram all the time, or because like that's a lot of work. That's a full-time job. Because like I'm in charge of that. Like trying to come up with like engaging things is really hard. So props to people who do that. But but yeah, honestly, that would be like my biggest advice to people is just setting smaller goals, and honestly just being honest with where you're at and with your group, because like I know one of my big sayings when like especially when I'm working is just fake it till you make it if you're like struggling, but like you can't always do that. Like that can't always be your go-to move. So you just need to be honest and open about where you're at personally, and be honest about what your capacity can be, because if you're gonna fake it till you make it, you're doing a big disservice to the potential work and your group members.
So speaking about faking it till you make it, so have any, and you know what, forget I even said that, but so have any of you done community organizing before? Do you have any prior experience doing community organizing? Because I mean, that's something, if you've never done it before, I mean, it's easy to make some big mistakes. And if you hadn't, did you bring someone in to kind of give you advice, or have you just kind of figured out what works for you?
Well, I have never done it. I know I haven't. Because I went straight from high school, I went to massage school. So I've been a massage therapist for the past 6 years, and I work by myself. So it definitely was a change up to my regular day job, having to work with others, which is not like a bad thing. I work well with others as well. It's not
I'm like, what are you saying? Oh my God.
disclaimer. But yeah, I personally have never done it, so I'm like the Energizer Bunny when it comes to like being excited and hyped about something. I'm just like, okay, let's do it. Okay, we need to get this done. Okay, I'll do that. And then so I'm the one that tends to like overdo things and take on more than what they can handle. But my sister Amy, she was a fellow with the Public Allies and has done community service work, and has worked in the nonprofit sector, where she used to work at the Michigan Science Center and was a part of a task force that worked with young girls from 8 to 12 years old and the project was called the STEManista Project, and their initiative was to get these young girls to be more engaged in STEM. So that was a mouthful, but yeah. So I know having Amy be a part of Change4Trenton has really helped guide us, because she would be like actually like help break down like what needs to happen and give realistic timelines, like rather when all of us are just like, yeah, let's do this, like we got it, like okay, you do this, I'll do that. Then but Amy was really the one that was able to Amy and Bree were like you were able to like kind of hone in and like bring us back down to the ground. And
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the plus sides, because just to add before I say that Lucy and Nina had also been doing a bit of community organizing as well. They were organizing Black Lives Matter protests downriver, and I think Lucy was really into sort of community organizing stuff before that. She went to college on the East Coast and had done some stuff there. So there were like a couple of people who had varying degrees of experience in that. But I think one of the best bits about the group was that we all just had totally different strengths. So we checked everything about each other in varying ways. And I think we constantly learned a lot from each other. So like I spend most of my day writing. So I'm super happy to like write out an email it'll take me all 5 minutes and that's super fine. Whereas other people were like, I do not ever want to write an email. That sounds horrible. But then like when we were organizing our presentation, I mean, I went super intellectual, academic. I had about 5 different examples, and, you know, I was pulling from Ibram Kendi's work, and I was doing all of this stuff. And, you know, we sort of did a run through of the presentation like 2 or 3 days before we went to the school board meeting. And, you know, everybody knew exactly who I was. So they were perfectly prepared for Bree's going to talk too much. She's going to have too many historical examples. Could be way too like above the, you know, like, whoa, just like bring it back down to earth, man. Like, what are you trying to say? And I got great feedback, and it, you know, got cut down massively, and it was really helpful to kind of hone my ideas. So I think we each kind of bring totally different strengths and are pretty honest with each other when it's like, okay, Bree, choose one of the 4 and go with that. Like, and I think that's one of the things that has made us work together well, because we have a lot of respect for each other's strengths, and also a lot of sympathy for the weaknesses that we each have.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you all work well together, you know, get along well. And I think that's very important for the community organizing work, is to trust in the teammates and trust that, you know, if your strength is not this one thing, to know that somebody on your team, they got that strength, and they can help you out. I'm inspired. This is wonderful. So what I'm really curious to know, especially for me, is I don't have kids, but if I have kids one day, there's going to be a bunch of little Native American kids running around Trenton. And so if they're going to the high school or the middle school, I'm curious, I want them to feel safe and to, you know, be able to have these good experiences of diversity. So my question I want to hear from you all, and Rachel and Kevin, is like, what can the Trenton school system look like in the next 30 years? You know, what is that vision that you all have that we can all rally around?
It's a really big question, Brandon.
Well, we can pause. We can pause and think about it for a minute. I'm just curious about, like,
well, I actually wrote out a list.
Oh, all right. We got a list in the building.
I have my, because that's how I am. That's how I roll. So Hannah has sent me the question, what are your hopes for Trenton Public School in the future, which I'm sure she got from you, Brandon. So I just did a couple bullet points here, and the main word was intentionality, some real intention put towards this topic. I want to see more intention when they seek out people to hire for staff and for administrators. I want to see qualified Black people and people of color start to be hired within our school district. I want my kids to learn from them. And if you are a child of color, you need someone to identify with as you're growing up. I want to see curriculum that includes literature, art, opinions from Black people and people of color. I want to see discussions on race and whiteness and systematic racism throughout the year. That's intentional, so people can start learning how to talk about these things. I want to see the Trenton Public Schools inviting non-white speakers, artists, activists, civil rights activists, particularly on things like Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, or during Black History Month, which I don't even think that Trenton does, or Blackout Bullying Month. Those are all, appropriate times to bring in speakers that would be non-white. And even at Thanksgiving time, when our kids are doing their performances, or I think when my child's were second grade, first grade, third grade, they did a little drum performance for all the parents. I would love to see an invitation from the Indigenous community to come in and to hear their perspective of what Thanksgiving means to them, and how they do or don't celebrate it. That perspective needs to be there. I want to see our kids graduating with a connection between, I know my kids learn about Jim Crow. I know they learn about the Civil Rights Movement. I know they know, Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks. But what they don't know is they don't know how to connect the past to the present. And that's a problem. Right. So I want to see some kind of educational connection between the Civil Rights Movement and unjust voting laws, and housing discrimination in the past, and unequal educational opportunities because of of the way our system is set up to fund schools and our criminal justice system and how it affects millions today. It's not something that you just learn about that happened 50 years ago. There needs to be that connection and those discussions happening. I want to see, I don't really know how much they're doing now. I know they're doing more than they used to do, but intention with their education on unconscious biases, diversity, and inclusion with the staff, the kids. And I'd love to see opportunities for communities to come to these kind of seminars and these kind of talks, so that there's some education going on throughout the year for the entire community, along with teachers, not just dumping it on teachers to do everything. And one thing that really bothered me this summer was when those 2 notes were left on the children's cars. The 2 biracial families got those hateful notes left on their cars, one which my child goes to school with personally. And we've had other instances back in, 2016, when the KK flyers got left on people's lawns. And then in 2006, when we were living here, we heard of the burning crosses on the biracial family that moved into Trenton. 2 days that happened where there was crosses burning on their lawns. I want to see a reaction from churches, from church leaders, from school administrators, from teachers. We cannot be quiet or silent when these kind of awful racist acts happen within our community. So I read about it in the newspaper. That's like how I find out about it. But those are opportunities for us to stand up and say, no, we are not tolerating this kind of stuff. So I just want everyone my kids were welcomed here. They were treated well here. I want everybody to have that experience. And so we have a lot of work to do because not everybody feels that way. That's my list.
No, that is a list. Let me tell you, that is a list. Wow, 2006.
How do you implement that? I mean, I can have a wish list. That's the thing that's so hard, is like, how do you get the conversation moved to the platforms? I mean, I'm a stay-home mom, so I'm not in the schools. I don't teach. I'm not on the school boards. Those are where actions can take place. Now, I have in the last year, me and Kevin have taken responsibility to try to narrow that gap with our children. We have understood, looking back over the last 20 years, we weren't educated in certain ways. And so we certainly couldn't pass that on to our children. So we educated ourselves a bit more, got outside of our circles, and we're trying to fill the gaps with our kids. Better late than never, I guess you can say, to give them a better chance of understanding these complex situations and their responsibility to engage in them, to talk about them, to vote for the common good, all those type of different things when they get out on their own. So, you can do something as a parent when you're not in the systems, but it needs to be done in the systems.
Yeah, and change. Go ahead, Kevin. Yeah.
I was just say where Rachel said is things that we didn't grow up with or have, and we realized that as adults, as parents, that we missed out on for ourselves, and we didn't want to do that with our kids. It was late. That's my hope, is that these changes can start taking place within Trenton and with other communities locally, that won't leave the current children and their children with that same gap, with that same longing or total, I can't even say misunderstanding, total lack of knowledge of what is truly experienced by a good number of people. I don't necessarily believe that Trenton demographics will change much, in the next 30 years. As has been discussed here, people like to stay here. People like to raise their families here. There will be some changes, I'm assuming, but I think if these changes go within the schools, and that there is some education there, and within the community there's education there, then those kids that grow up through it are developed at a much higher level of really what it is to be human and to be part of a community.
Wow. Well, so, and So in 2006 was not a long time ago, you know, like burning crosses,
Right.
that
Yes,
that
and
blows my mind.
you have to know that other communities around here heard about that, you know.
Right.
So if you're a person of color, Trenton's not on the top of your list to move in. So
No.
Right.
communities around here need to see us reacting to those type of incidences.
Right, and Change for Trenton, I think, is working and helps to bring the voice for people who might not be on the school board or involved in the school system to bring those conversations up, right? And so people can have a voice and share, you know, and that's right, super critical, you know, at this time, and is very much needed. So how can we, as a Trenton, a church, leaders downriver, support the movement that's going on with Change for Trenton? You know, how can we do that? What's next for you all and all that good stuff?
I mean, I think fundamentally one of the most important things that we feel really strongly about people doing is having conversations, right? Because we've just brought up 2006. I was 15 or 16. I was old enough to know what was going on, but I don't remember a conversation about it. We didn't talk about it at school. You know, my parents are very liberal and progressive people, but even at the time, we didn't talk about that. Talking about racism is hard and it's scary, and we are taught culturally not to do it. And I think that we are in a sort of national and even global moment of reckoning right now, of recognizing we can't not talk about it. It's uncomfortable. It makes you feel scared. It makes you feel nervous. You're anxious that you're going to say the wrong thing. You're going to put your foot in your mouth. You're going to, make a big misstep. You're going to lose the trust of someone that you care about. But the consequences of not talking about it are way bigger than continuing to not just stay silent, right? And so I think in a community like Trenton, where crosses were burned on the lawns of biracial families in 2006 and not a word was spoken in the school. I was a high school student. We were perfectly capable of having that conversation. That can't ever happen again, right? Like that can't. And we're seeing similar things happen and still silent. So like, I think the biggest thing for Change for Trenton is when somebody's like, well, what should I be doing? Sometimes doing something doesn't mean standing at the very forefront of a Black Lives Matter protest and putting yourself in, having a big picture of yourself in the news herald. Sometimes it's saying, hi, I need to know how to talk about this. Can you, can a couple of white people that all are on the same page sit down and like figure out how to have this conversation so that we don't replicate patterns of behavior that are harmful to the people around us and to people who don't feel comfortable in Trenton anymore. Because of course, people who are not white don't feel comfortable in Trenton. You can't watch something like 2006 or the flyers put on people's cars and say, oh yeah, we should definitely use the school of choice option and go to Trenton. Why would you? So I think sorry, I mean, it's funny, but it's also like, it's not funny, right? Like it's horrifying. So I think the first thing for us that when people say, what should we be doing, is learn how to talk about it. Be comfortable with being really, really uncomfortable, which is something people say, but it is so uncomfortable talking to people about racism. It's not true. Like it's a really difficult conversation to have, and just learn how to do that so that at the very least you have that vocabulary and people check you, right? Like, that people are going to say, wait a second, we're not going to do that. That's not okay. So that you're not causing harm.
Yeah, Brandon, I don't know if speaking religiously or from the church, there's actually a group called Be the Bridge, and Latasha Morrison is the founder of that group. And so I think she'd be something really interesting for you to look up. She's got all kinds of resources that are tied to the Christian church, and platforms and Facebook groups that have thousands and thousands of members, where there's just a dialogue, going on. And there's a lot of educational material that you're required to read through before you can join any of the groups. So I've mentioned it to our church, I'll mention it to you. I've been part of it for over a year now. And it gives you all kinds of very good resources, all the way from children to adults, on books, websites, people to follow, who to be listening to, what activists are, going on that are having these kind of conversations. So I just found it a great resource for churches.
That's awesome. I just wrote that down. Be the bridge. And who'd you say the name of the person who was
Yeah,
leading all?
it's Latasha,
Mhm.
and last name is Morrison, Morrison.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, St. Philip, we try the best we can to help educate. We've hosted community forums and things like that. At last April, I believe we held a online forum about race and COVID, and just try to talk about how like people of color are more likely to die from COVID and why that is, and how the environmental racism and all that. And but
Yeah,
it's important.
we had a separate forum on environmental justice, specifically the environmental racism that happens in Southwest Detroit with all of the industry and the trucking on the roads. So we've done a few things, and then they've been really successful. I feel like they've been received really well in the community too.
Have faith leaders from the community come, like leaders of churches?
Well, we had a couple. We had some.
We had Brandon, and we had Pastor Jack, who's at Unity down the road, and yeah, we've had people from our congregations and from other churches in our conference, as well as people who are outside.
Yeah.
So it's been a great mix of people who are all interested in these things.
Good.
Yeah, and so I think it's part of the call of churches in general to speak up and to have these platforms for things that are not just about church but about the community. That's part of what we're actually, when you become a pastor, that's part of your calling, is to advocate for those on the margins and for justice, so that's pretty important for us. Is there anything else that anybody wants to share? This has been a very fruitful time for me. I hope it has been for you all. Is there any other final thoughts or questions or anything?
I just want to say, like another way that people can still be like a part of Change for Trenton or what they can work on is just to be able to hold people accountable. Like hold the schools accountable, like call them out when something isn't going right, or if they didn't handle something correctly. Like call them out, like send a quick little email, get a couple people to send an email. I know school board meetings aren't exciting, but hop on a school board meeting and express why you're upset and why and why they need to do better next time and for the future. I think that's another huge key in our work, is just being able to respectfully call people out and just hold people accountable for their actions.
Yeah, I think if anything, what we've really learned is that showing up it sounds easy, but it's actually really hard to continue doing, like maintaining, going to school board meetings and really kind of carving that time out in your schedule to do that is hard, and not all of us can do that all the time. But I think that there are people in Trenton that are willing to have these conversations, and there are people in Trenton in positions of power that are willing to have these conversations, and it's really hard for them to feel supported in doing the right thing when it's just Hannah and I, or Hannah and Amy and I, or some other permutation of members of Change for Trenton turning up and saying, "Hi, we're here again, and we also just want to let you know," or if it's just the Cartwright showing up and saying, "Hi, it's us again, and we just wanted to let you know," there has to be more people. And so if you're not happy with something that's happening, or you think, "Gosh, you could really do better," or "I think those people want to do better," then tell them, because there's a lot of pressure from people who don't want things to be better in Trenton being put on them. So we have to sort of make sure that they know there is vocal community support for these things. So show up.
So important, showing up. I like what you said. It's hard to sustain that energy of showing up.
That's what I tell my children. I said, half of the secret to life is just getting there. Just show up. More than half of it is showing up for whatever you're supposed to be showing up for.
That's right. It's a valuable lesson. And that's like one of the secrets, like they don't teach you. Like that's not a course that you take at college. You know what I mean? But it is so important.
I mean, I suppose it is if you never show up to class and then you
Right.
realize
Yeah.
you don't show. I'm having been on the other side of that classroom, and I'm like, if you just came, it would be so much easier. But yeah, it's always easier to say no to things. I think we forget how many things in life that we actually say, no, I can't make that, or I can't do that. And the choices that we make are really, they're important in the end. What do we make the time for? And some weeks we have to, I mean, as Hannah was talking about earlier, capacity and being really respectful of where you're personally at right now is so important, but also having a lot of self-reflection and saying, what am I not making time for right now and why is also really important.
Well, this has all been really wonderful, and I am inspired to go out and make a change. So thank you all for being with us and talking, and I hope that this was as fruitful for you as it was for me. And so thanks everyone for listening, and I'm really awkward at ending podcasts, but this has been fun, and we'll see you all later.